We're doing a little hangout session here, talking about how to take a song idea and turn it into an arrangement, or I guess arrange a song idea, because traditionally those two processes, songwriting and then arranging, they're separate. Typically when you're writing a song, you're just focused on getting your chord changes down, getting your melody and lyrics, and then you take that into somebody. And a lot of times in the modern industry, the arranger is also a producer. So that's why we hear that term being thrown around a lot, but they're separate things. So we have songwriting and we have arranging. Right now, we're going to focus on a song that has already been written. We have the basic idea. They have a scratch track down. They have some drums, bass, a guitar part, but there's not too much going on to it. So it's not really a full-on record just yet. This is by one of your fellow students, Rebecca Dionio. She's out in Nevada. This is her song. It's called Fell in Love, and we did a session on it on Monday or Tuesday, I believe. And I took her through some of the changes that I made. I just did some quick recordings and whatnot, got everything all situated for her, and I showed her step by step the changes. So I'm going to show you guys some of those changes that I made to make her song idea into an actual record, or at least first level demo. Keep in mind, just like when you're songwriting or when you're producing an instrumental for somebody, or for those of you who do that, you don't want to fill up all the space right away. Same goes with songwriting and writing a demo. You don't want to take up all the space and try to worry about little details here and there and whatnot, because you don't necessarily know what's going on with the bigger picture just yet. So depending on what stage you are with your song or your demo, you may want to just do like simple drums, simple bass, whatever, if you're going to have people come in there. In this case, that's what I did. I just did a quick MIDI drum program. So that way, if there was a drummer coming in, he can come in, get the feel of the song, and do his own stuff over it. Same with everything else. So let's go ahead and switch over to the session real quick. Let's see here. We're going to transition over here in a second. This thing's not wanting to go over. Sorry about all this, guys. I'm still working out technical difficulties here. We switched over to new software. Some of you guys probably remember us using Google Hangout. Now we got this new thing, Webinar Jam. It's interesting. So anyway, if you guys can see this screen here, we have the full session here. I have some tracks over on the left side. We're not going to really worry about those too much. Those are hidden. Those are just effects and whatnot I had on there just to create the tones, but we're not worried about mixing or anything. This track isn't mixed. It's zeroed out. I have these things in stereo because I bounced them out, or I recorded them out to audio tracks, because some of you guys who had sessions with me know that if you're taking stuff from studio, you need to make sure you have it bounced out, because you don't know what plugin somebody's going to have. In this case, I didn't know what plugin she had on her computer, so I just made sure I bounced everything out, put them in stereo files so I can do left and right like my panning was in my session. But if we're doing a regular mix, I might just split these all out to mono and work from there. So here we go. Let's go find the original idea here. It's the bottom track here in red. And we're going to listen to a little bit. I'll skim ahead as I need to. Can you hear the audio? There we go. So again, this is just a demo of the song. So far so good, nice cool idea. You get the vibe, you get everything that you need from the song. The big broad picture. Okay. So far what we have is just verse, chorus, same feel, everything is completely the same all the way across, which is okay for our demo. We're just getting that feel of things. So now in the songwriting stage, or the arranging stage, I went ahead and added some new elements in here. Now the drums, played them pretty much the same as they were, just used a better sound. Again, MIDI drums. Kept the bass part the same for the time being. Now our first change is coming up soon. It's coming up right about here. So I was thinking about adding some texture in there. So I added a nice kind of percussive guitar part. Put it over to one side because I don't want to take up too much space.
How do you feel?
Then the same guitar part's coming up again. Same section. In between the vocal, we have an introduction of another little line there on one side. But let's actually take a step back, actually. I forgot. I want to mention a few things before we start talking about parts. When I first got this song, once I listened to it a few times, I thought about the actual arrangement of the lyrics and the chord changes before I started doing a lot of this color stuff that I just showed you guys. So what I did was I listened and I found that her verse and her chorus kind of needed something in between it. So instead of having, a whole nother set of lyrics written, I just went ahead and changed the form of the song so that there's a pre-chorus. So the first part when she's singing her chorus is now a pre-chorus in this new version of the song. So let me jump you to that section here. So that's our pre-chorus. Has the same feel as our verse. Then when we get to the chorus, we have a whole nother feel. So now we're getting a little bit more mileage out of the song. So I went through to find all the spots where I can do little things like that to make the form a little bit more memorable instead of just static the whole way through, which is what we want to do first off. We don't want to start with a whole bunch of little details because it's hard to work that way. It's better to work broad, get all our structure together, and then we can start thinking about everything in context. Now the next thing I want to point out about the broad structure of this is that I changed the feel just a little bit in our second verse, so that way we have some difference between the two parts. So our first verse was that one feel that we use all the way through the chorus in the original track. Same thing for our second verse. This time we have a little bit more motion in our drums. And coming up, we're going to have some harmonic changes. So instead of having the same chords all the way across, we reharmonize things. Use different chords to note that we're at a different section. So again, we're getting more mileage out of this. So let's go back to the original for a second here. Let's check this out. So here we are. That's our chorus. If we skip ahead, same thing, same feel. Now let's go back to the version that was arranged. So as we're scanning through the song, just picking random spots, our sections are different. And now we know as listeners that we're in different spots of the song versus the original track. We skip around, we don't know where we are. So we got that taken care of. We got lyrics rearranged and reharmonized, so that way we know we're in the first verse. We have a different feel for our chorus, and we have different chord changes in the second verse / chorus thing that we had going on. So now let's go ahead and look at some of these parts. So the first thing I pointed out to you guys when we got into this hangout was that I added a percussive element over on the right side of the mix. And I did that in between the vocal because the vocal is always going to be your most important thing. You don't want to step on that, especially in a song like this. We're talking about love. It's one thing that's going to resonate with everybody. So you always got to make sure those themes are really evident. So we have this nice percussive thing, not taking away from anything, just nice and cool, not really adding a whole bunch there. Now I'm kind of following like 4 or 8 bar change rule where you try to add a new element in each time. So aside from our percussive lick on the right side, we have a chord come in, new texture, new color. Now, subtle thing here though, I didn't just play those chord changes all the way through. I just let that one chord there to kind of introduce this next section. So now I have the full color that I was going towards. So we're just doing footballs here. Footballs, for those of you who don't know, they're whole notes because on a page it looked like a football, like kind of an oval shape. The next thing I want to point out here with this chorus, like I said, we changed the feel a little bit. We got new drums in there. We have drums doing a little bit more motion, and we added some motion to the bass line. Didn't have the drums doing too much because I want to leave room for my drummer to come in, once I bring him in there to kind of just hear it, get the feel, and be like, all right, yeah, I know what I'm going to do here. I know what fills I'm going to add and all that good stuff. We're going to leave space for him to be creative. We don't want to write his part out, or otherwise we might as well just use MIDI. Oh, we have a question for Ambrose. Looks like I didn't use any plugins. Looks like you're asking about plugins. I didn't really use any plugins that were there for the edit. I just used stuff that created guitar tone. And a lot of my tone was actually created from my amp. And I did a little bit of volume stuff just to get the parts right, but I'm not focused on mixing, so I'm not really talking about plugins or using a bunch of plugins here. So let's continue on here. So this first chorus has the same chord changes as our first verse. So we're only changing feel here. We're not reharmonizing just yet. We'll get to the reharmonization later. So that way when we talk about our first and second choruses, we have some difference there. It's not just going to be a feel change. It's going to actually be harmonic changes. Okay, so a few things about this second verse so far. Now you notice that the bass is playing the same changes as the first verse, but we're playing them a little bit differently. So that's giving us more mileage out of this second verse versus the first verse. We have a change in part. Next thing you'll notice is that the percussive element that was here in the first first verse is no longer there. So we set that expectation up for you to hear that, but we destroyed that expectation by not giving it to you. And that's kind of what you want to do with your arrangement. You want to set things up. You want to set your listener up to expect something, and then all of a sudden you surprise them. That perks their ears up. So that way they stay engaged with your music. Because if you just keep running the same things over and over again, it kind of just automatically goes to the background in your brain. The same goes for changing stuff too much. If you change things like every measure so that people can't keep track of it, there's nothing to latch onto, it's going to have the same effect. It's going to go into the background. It's kind of like if you were listening to somebody speak in a language you didn't understand. It's going to sound interesting at first, but because you can't really keep up with it, there's nothing for you to latch onto. Eventually, it's all just going to turn to chatter, and you're just going to zone out. Same thing with our music. So instead of having this percussive element go, just kind of coloring by numbers, we switched it. And now we have this little vocal hook going on there. So I just took that from the from the first chorus. That lick there. And I just put it into the verse. Now this I actually did use an effect on. I just processed it with an EQ, just did a telephone EQ, so I just made the band really small. That was the only processing for that. So that's taking the place of our percussive guitar element.
How do you feel I miss you.
So now we bring our percussive guitar element back into our second chorus. Gives it a little bit of texture there. So we have different harmonics, or not harmonics, but different harmonic changes. We have a different feel, and we have some percussive element added in there to add a little bit more texture. Now, something to notice here about that little section there, not only did we add that percussive element back from the first verse, but we changed it up. We didn't just have it go on the same time. We didn't want to just leave it paint by numbers again. Changed it up a little bit. So every 4 bars, 8 bars, maybe add something new, take something out. That's what we did here. So let's put it up a little bit so you can hear it better. So the first one was kind of a counter melody kind of thing. The second one's more just for rhythm, it's just da 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 da. So it's there to drive it along. And one trick that you can take away to your own writing or arranging is that when you add things like eighth notes in there, you know, they help to move stuff around. They create a lot of energy. So if you want something to kind of push along, or if you want something to bubble a little bit, you can add those eighth notes in there. Nice and percussive. Guitar is great for that. You can also do it on keyboard. And, you know, if you want to, you know, you can use things like loops or your boom. If you all are using Pro Tools, you have access to the boom instrument. And I use that a lot of times just to put under things, just to give it that nice bubble. You don't really need to hear it, but you gotta feel it. That's the point of this part that I added in here. That you're feeling it as a percussive element that's driving the music along. It's not really there to create some big harmonic moment. So let's listen to that second chorus again. I want to point out something else to you guys here about the chord changes.
How do you feel? I miss you. I miss you.
So again, keeping with the theme of small changes to keep people interested, I mentioned that I changed the chords here, but I didn't just leave those chords going at the same time. I had those new chord changes play twice, then I went back to the original set of chord changes. So it's kind of paying homage to our first chorus there, using those original set of changes, then going back to our reharmonized changes. So now we have our last chorus here. I did something nice and small there with a little bit of a reverse guitar, just as a transition. Now, if I was working this song out a little bit more, I'd probably make it a little bit bigger, make something happen that might be a little bit more interesting. But for now, it's a good transition over into our next section.
Do you understand?
Oh, I see a comment from Wayne. Thank you. Whatever information I can give you guys is great. So let's talk about this last chorus for a second. Again, thinking of keeping consistency, but changing things up to make the listener interested the whole time. So we already had our first chorus, bigger than our verse, texture feel or texture change. Had our second chorus, we added some elements in there and changed the parts a little bit. So now we got our third chorus. Now we got to think, well, hell, now what are we gonna do to make our third chorus better? So you only have two options really. You can either make it bigger by adding elements in there, stacking guitars, stacking parts in there, doing whatever you can to make that happen, or you can take stuff away. the direction I was going with this song when I was arranging it was not to make it small. I kind of wanted to build up as it goes along. Because that's, I guess, if you want to be poetic about it, that's how love works. You know, it builds up or as it goes along, and then if you're in a terrible relationship, it just dies. That'll be the end of your song, but that's a whole different thing. But I want to make this a bigger chorus. And you're going to run into an issue when you're writing songs like, well, how do I make things bigger? If you start off and you're like 0 to 60 in 0.2 seconds, you're going to have a hard time finishing a song and making it have a good dynamic arc. So one thing that you might want to consider when you're writing your song, or maybe even doing your arrangement, if you already have everything taken care of on the writing side, is to start with your last chorus or the biggest moment of your song. So that way you have something to work into. If you start from the left side of the page, you kind of just you're building things as you go along. You don't really have anything that you're working up to. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. A lot of times it doesn't really make for a really interesting arc. And a sign of a really novice songwriter and arranger is that the first minute of a song is just all introduction, kind of boring, and nothing's really happening. If you listen to all your favorite records, that's never really the case. There's always something changing, something going on. All the big records have that. All your favorite songs have that. Again, for those of you guys who do sessions with me talking about rock stuff, Beatles, you don't hear any songs that just start off and it's like, oh, okay, whatever. We're just gonna sit here for the first 30 seconds, their first minute. Same thing with pop songs. Great example of that that was pointed out to me that really woke me up to that was, I forgot what Pink song it was, but it was one of her big hits from the mid 2000s. It starts off in a totally different key, just strikes as one really funky guitar chord, and all of a sudden you're into the song. It's off to the races. And I didn't really like that song, but that example stuck with me because it's true. You listen to that and all of a sudden you wake up, there's this weird chord, and then all of a sudden this music is just happening. It's not waiting. So listen to stuff, go back and listen to the stuff you like and see if you can find those moments happen and try to recreate them. So I know I deviated just a little bit, so let's go back to talking about that last chorus. So, our last chorus is supposed to be the biggest moment, so good tip is to go ahead and start with that last chorus. So start with that biggest moment, the climax of the song. Now with this, looks like we have a question from Christopher. Is that a flanger on basically everything? It might be the signal. I wasn't using any flanger for this. I think there was a little bit of chorus going on, but no flanger that I can think of. So we got our last chorus. Again, we're looking to not step on the vocal. With the last chorus, you have a little bit of room to wiggle with your parts, make stuff a little bit more melodic or have a continuation of your solo. That's really typical in records, and it's been successful throughout the years. But we still don't want to make stuff so big and in your face that's taken away from our vocal, because our vocal's still there trying to portray a message. And usually with that last chorus, that's their last chance to really portray the meaning of the song. So we added some guitar parts in here, to give it a little bit of color, but we still have them in the background. They're not all over the place. They're not really big and distorted. They're not playing a whole bunch of notes. It's kind of just sitting in between things. So let's listen to that for a second. So sparse playing, and the tone is working with the vocal. Now the other thing here is that we took away some stuff. We took away the percussive guitars that were in the choruses because we don't need those anymore. We already have 2 separate guitar lines going on. Then we have a 3rd guitar line going that's just kind of playing the same chord over and over again, so it's creating a little bit of tension. And I think what I also did here was I took out some of the big football chords to make room for these things. So when you're adding stuff in, you always got to take some stuff away. So we added in licks, but when we added in those licks, we took away big chords that took up a lot of space, and we took away percussive stuff that was sitting on our sides. So that way we can accommodate these new licks. I didn't really. Oh, sorry. This is for Wayne. I didn't really get too much input from the artist because this was a student example. We weren't really working together. I was just showing her an example of how to go about arranging something. We're going to do another session where she's doing her own arrangement of a song she wrote, and then we're going to talk about input and all that stuff. But this is just an example of how she can go about making these changes to make her music a little bit more interesting. If I was working with an artist, a lot of times I do a basic arrangement first. It depends. Well, it really depends on who I'm working with. If I'm working with somebody I've been working with before, I will do some basic arrangement, kind of similar to this. Bring it in. We'll take some listens and be like, all right, yeah, I like this, I don't like this, or want to add some stuff in there. And then we do the second layer of arrangement together. Just going back and forth, and that also depends on the level of musical ability of that person. If there's somebody who doesn't really write music and just kind of, sings, doesn't really have that many ideas, a lot of the burden is going to be on me to make that happen, and that's okay because in this the music industry, we all have different jobs and whatnot. If I'm working with somebody who's a player, but is putting out a record or maybe doing a record for somebody else, then we'll go back and forth. We might play a few things. We'll sit there, have some conversations about what parts, why these things work, why they don't work. And we'll just, kind of feed off of each other. Like the last session I was doing on Tuesday night was with one of my buddies. We're doing a record for our upcoming project. And the way that we were working was that he had a guitar part that he really liked. He had the part and the melody. So he sang that and just played it a little bit, and all of a sudden I kind of caught a wave of where I wanted to go with it. And we jammed and recorded it at the same time. So I was actually using an 808, and I was just playing it in on the keyboard as he was singing and playing his part. And I just took snippets of that recording, fixed it up, cleaned it up, and started sequencing it. So we had our basis there, and then we just went ahead and started to build on it a little bit. So then I went back and I added a guitar part against his part. We're still working on the song, but that's as far as we got. That's the relationship that we had versus if I was working with somebody I didn't really know, wasn't really a player, didn't have those ideas, just had lyrics and maybe a melody. Then, maybe I have to go back and do something like this, build the parts up, bring it into them, show them what I thought about it, and then they can start feeding off of that. Hope that helps out. So anyway, back to this last course. We're almost done with this arrangement here. So took stuff out of it, took out the big chords, took out the rhythm percussive guitars, so that way I can make room for those licks. Otherwise, everything will be nice and cluttered, or not nice and cluttered, but cluttered, and we don't want to have that. We still want everything to kind of breathe a little bit. And we're still going to leave room for if we're going to bring in another bass player to play on top of it, the drummer, maybe if we're going to add some keyboard parts, all that stuff. We're leaving room for that. So took some stuff out to make some space. Let me back up a little bit. Oh, sorry. Let me stop this before I continue on. I got another question from Jonathan Martinez. Let's see. Yeah, when you begin making a song, or when I begin making a song, I try to keep it really simple these days. Because remember, I was once in your guys' shoes and trying to figure stuff out. And I used to try to throw everything at one song I did at the same time, and I found myself not finishing anything because you start to lose creative steam because there's so much clutter going on. Once I started taking a few more songwriting classes and listening to people talk about songwriting, there's a great book called Songwriters on Songwriting that really gives a lot of insight. And then of course just listening critically and seeing how people are working through their problems. I started to add less and just really start to focus on basic changes and then adding melody and lyrics in there. The greatest thing about starting with these basic changes, basic chord changes that is that you're not setting yourself up for limitation. You're actually making yourself really open by just taking the small stuff, because once you get to this stage here, when you're rearranging your song, you can go ahead and reharmonize your chords any way you want to. You can go ahead and substitute chords, cut stuff in and out and all that. But if you base a song based on all these little small, minute details, you've already locked yourself in there to having to have those small, minute details. And once you take them out, then you don't have the same song anymore, or you just don't finish it. So good way to start songwriting, especially if you're a beginner, is to start simple. You know, just get your solid stuff down. Get it so that you can have a really great singable melody that can be played really or accompanied really easy by keyboard, guitar, whatever it may be. Then work from there. Now, of course, there are exceptions. You know, everybody has their own style of writing or whatnot. Sometimes it does benefit you to start with small stuff. You know, if that's the way you think or that's the way you're thinking about that song, you know, if it's based on a series of small hooks or something like that, you got to have those things together to make that song happen. But generally speaking, you're going to start small, work your way bigger as you're going along. Let's see here. Themes. If you're writing a song, a great place to start is to just have a nice theme, like a vocal theme, rhythmic theme, or something that you're always going to come back to. That way you know to build your way into that. And you can write that stuff into your writing, like by just writing it as a lyric, or, you know, playing the parts that you're trying to make with a certain rhythm. That's a really great device to have in your arsenal. So let's go and listen to this last section of this song. So last chorus here. There's some BS click on there. I probably meant to take that out. It's not really anything. So this last section of the song is there to build a little bit of a static tension. This is not something that I would just automatically hear in an arrangement. It's like, oh yeah, you know, I gotta have this static tension ending at the end of the riff thing. This was kind of tacked on at the very end after I already went through my forms, like decided how I want to portray each part. I had to come up with an ending. I just heard this. I wanted it to be a little bit different, and I wanted to use something that had a little bit of tension. You know, it left me on a kind of nebulous note. So I was like, let's try a nebulous part. So what I did was just have the bass, or played the bass in. So it's just one note playing the whole time, and she's singing, she's doing her changes, she's you know, inflecting her voice and whatnot, and singing differently than she's saying at any other point in the song. So it really worked well. And then I just had the drums just going over and over again with that same loop, you know, really not trying to introduce too much new material, because the song's going to end. You introduce new material, you have to explain that new material. How can we explain new material if the song's going to end, right? Let's see here. We got another question from Ambrose. Okay, so Ambrose, you want every song to end up sounding like a radio hit, but when it doesn't, you don't think that the song is finished. Well, that's a whole different can of worms, and you're gonna get a lot of different answers about this if you are fortunate enough to have a long career. It really depends on the purpose of the song. I don't know if you necessarily need to think about overcoming this. In the market that you're in, or not market, but the industry that you're in now, you don't have to worry about making a bunch of radio singles. I mean, the best example of that right now, Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole put out 2 albums, you know, 2014 Forest Hills Drives back in that year, and then, you know, To Pimp a Butterfly in 2015. Didn't really have, you know, huge radio tracks, or at least they weren't thinking about huge radio tracks. They weren't thinking about that kind of marketing. They were thinking about making the best kind of music, and all of a sudden you hear No Role Models, you hear We Gonna Be Alright. You know, we hear all those songs on the radio right now. So it's not always about trying to make a song that sounds radio ready. However, there are situations where you do need to do that. If you're contracted by somebody to make a song that sounds that way, if you need to overcome that, the best way to do it is to listen to the stuff that you hear on the radio, the stuff that they are influenced by, the stuff that they want to go towards, and find out what elements are in those songs that make them sound that way, and not copy those elements, but find a way to incorporate those elements. And don't be afraid to scrap things. You know, don't think that everything that you've written is so precious that you can't throw it away, rearrange it, or, you know, completely cut it out of the song. You gotta be willing to manipulate your art as much as possible if you want it to go the direction that you want. There's plenty of times when I'm writing songs that they just don't work for a while. You know, they don't work for like 2 or 3 months. And I end up having to like completely take stuff out of them, like take out sections and rework them until I can think about how that section works. But that's totally fine if you have the time. Don't be afraid to do that. I think that'll help you overcome that whole little situation a bit better. Hopefully that answers your question, but if not, we can talk about it a little bit more. It's like I said, it's a whole can of worms. It depends on where your mind is. I don't really know where your mind is as far as, why you want to make something radio ready, or if that's just a sound quality thing that you might be going through. So we can talk about that later on if you want. Okay, so let's just back this up just a second, just so you can hear that static ending again. So yeah, so she's really starting to let go right here. She's really pushing towards it. So it was good to have that nice little moment, this nice tension where she's expressing at least the most important part of the song, in my opinion. And honestly, if I was going back and like really doing an arrangement on this song, I probably would clean that ending up a little bit. Wouldn't just leave it so long maybe or stagnate. It kind of works, but I like to tighten things up. I always like to go back and do different levels of revision. So that's one thing I would look at, as well as some of these choruses. So it's not a perfect arrangement by any means. It would definitely, by my standards of putting out, I would definitely have to go back and do some stuff to it. But for the most part, it's there. You can hear that it's way different from where we started, right? It's not, which was a cool vibe. Definitely has that 311 thing going on, but now we listen to it and it's a world. It's not just a vibe anymore. It's like it's a world that you can get into. You can groove to it. And one of the things I want to harp on as we come to the end of this is consistency. So I talked about making changes, small changes throughout, harmonic changes, adding rhythmic stuff, taking stuff away, but it's still consistent. It still sounds like it's within the same song. The groove is still the same. That's really important. You can't be like, I'm going to change everything from section to section. It's going to sound really crazy. You don't want that, especially, for somebody like Ambrose who's going for a commercial track. Oh, we got another question here. We got two questions, actually. We got one from Wayne. Is there an initial recording resolution I choose recording within Pro Tools? Depends on the purpose of the track. When I do sessions over at ES Audio, or when I was doing some stuff over at ES Audio, Donnie is always like, yeah, we do everything here in 48. So that way it's always video ready. If somebody comes back and wants to do a video. Now, if you're getting tracks from somebody and you're building on those tracks, and you got to kind of be paying attention to what resolution they're using, so that way everything syncs up nice and tight. But for the most part, it's up to you what you're planning on using it for, how you want to work, what system you're using, all that good stuff. Okay, let's see. We have one from Jonathan Martinez. Jamal, do you usually begin with a chord progression? I typically start with a chord progression because I'm not the best singer in the world, and my roots in playing has been with guitar. So I automatically get trapped into thinking that way. Sometimes I do start with my vocal melody or start with like a melodic theme, but a lot of times I will start with guitar, and that's just because of the way I am as a musician, or at least came up as a musician. Guitar first. I didn't really get into seriously like writing lyrics or trying to write vocals or even singing when I do until I was like in my early 20s, like 21, 22 or whatnot. Before that, it was all just garagey stuff inside, not inside garage, sometimes outside garage, but you get what I mean. It was a lot of just guitar riffing and seeing what I could come up with until I got educated and until I started doing some work. Cool. So I think that is about it. Let's see if there's any other questions coming through here. But again, consistency, really important. We want to make the changes happen, but we still want to make this sound like it's within the same song. because if we change everything, all over the place, it's just going to have the same effect as if we didn't change anything at all. There's nothing to latch onto. Looks like we have another question from Erica here. Let's see. So when training a track, background beat, what are the best instruments to start with? I guess it depends on the direction you're trying to go with the song. Piano is usually something that you always want to look at first because you have the best range of notes on the piano and chord changes. You're not limited by figures, I guess, for lack of a better word. Like if you're using a guitar, piano, you can voice everything the way you want, and you have 10 fingers to play piano. Guitar also it's a really great option to start with as well, but you're going to be limited based on what the instrument can do. Drums, groove is important. I'd say, depending on the way you're thinking, you want to start with either drums or piano. I typically start with, like I was saying, guitar, and start thinking about the groove. Once I have a decent idea of what I want to do on a guitar with chord changes and whatnot, then I go to my drums. If you're using Pro Tools, you have access to, again, Boom. If you want to have more electronic or use the 808s that they have in there, they're not the best, but they demo, it's okay. And you also have Expand that you can use, and you can create a drum kit using Expand and just place some stuff in there and get a nice feel. So once I have some chord changes, start with the piano or guitar, go with my drums, then throw a bass on there. But all this stuff changes as you're writing your song or as you're experimenting and finding out what works best for you. But I'd say those are the main ones there. So piano, guitar, bass, drums. Now, if you're working in a different genre or a different field, you're not doing contemporary music. I don't want to say pop music because everybody's got a lot of different connotations for that. We don't want to have a discussion about that. We're not talking about that pop rock R&B kind of world. If you're doing like string arrangements or something, you're going to start with piano. So that way you can do your reduction, your textural reduction, or your piece reduction, and then build it from there. You don't want to start with using a whole bunch of different instruments because those things are colored. The piano is your harmonic and melodic content, so you start there when you're doing that kind of stuff and build. Oh, looks like we have one from Desiree. Let's see. What if a producer or an engineer, as a producer or engineer, you make changes like that to an artist's song and they do not like them? Well, in that case, you tell that artist to go sod off. No, that's not true. If they make changes or you make changes and they don't like it, then you got to talk to them about what they want. It's really great for you to have a conversation with that artist, like a really deep conversation with that artist starting out, and maybe play them a few things or, play a few things for them on your instrument or whatnot to accommodate their ideas, just to see where they want to go, to avoid having to make so many changes. But you're not going to please everybody. If there's stuff in there that they don't like, you make those changes. You just got to kind of bite the bullet and go back and rework it with them if they're paying the bill. Now, if you're in a situation where you have a little leverage and you can kind of push your changes around, push your agenda around, that's okay. Just don't be a bully about it. Just make sure you're still in communication with them, expressing your understanding of what they don't like, and why, and talk about why you think your changes work best, so that way you guys can keep a nice, smooth working relationship. As long as as long as your idea is proven to really make that song move and do what it needs to, because some people just have bad ideas. That's just straight up. Sometimes you have to work with that. But if your idea is working, you have that room to be able to be like, yeah, I think, with my level of expertise or whatever you may say, I think my changes work much better with your song. To have that conversation politely, so you guys can not be at each other's throats for however long it takes to make that song. Let's see, Christopher. Let's see. If I shoot you a link later in email, would you mind giving me some input on a project I'm working on? Working with Ableton Live 9. Yeah, I can give you some input. I don't use too much Ableton, but I mean, from a songwriting, arranging standpoint, I can do that. I might be able to help you a little bit with it, but I'm not like a huge Ableton guy there. But we do have Gerald, who did a hangout like a week or two ago. He uses Ableton. He's dope. So you know, if that's the case, if it's an Ableton related question, we can do that. Oh, we got another one from Jonathan here. Let's see. Is the recording connection currently teaching music theory and composition and arrangement? The recording connection is not. It's not like all of us here are, but I am doing it. So all you guys get sent to me. So yeah, you know, add on to my workload, Jonathan. It's okay. Let's see here. Oh yeah, let me switch over the camera here, I guess, because we're pretty much done with this bad boy. Not a bad little lesson here with this. I wish I had some other stuff to show you guys too. You know, that'd be really cool. I mean, I'll bring some more and do another type of song. Let's see. I don't know if this is switched over. Anya, is this switched over to the camera? Oh, sorry, we got another one from Christopher here. Oh, okay, yeah, Christopher, if it's about the song, yeah, we'll do that, man. Send me something.